Okay, great. It's approximately 4:05, and we'll call the third meeting of the Citizens Commission on Elected Officials' Compensation to order. I'll note for the record that all 5 members of the commission are present. Mr. Paul and Mr. McGinnis, if you would like to identify the other members of staff or other persons present, please feel free to do so for the record.
Greg Beaverson, sitting here from Human Resources. We have Director Nicole Brandon, also of Human Resources.
And from the City Clerk's Office, Cheryl Austin, helping us out, keeping track of minutes.
Very good, thank you. And Mr. Diamond as well?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Charles. See, I'm on his Christmas card list. Outstanding, thank you very much. At this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the March 25th, 2015 meeting. So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It has been properly moved by Commission Member Murdoch and seconded by Commission Member Easterday that the minutes of the March 25th, 2015 meeting be approved. Any questions on the motion? Okay. All in favor may show by stating aye.
Aye.
All opposed have the same right. And hearing none, the minutes are approved unanimously. Mr. Paul, it's my understanding that we have a number of items that yourself and/or Mr. McGinnis are prepared to provide updates from discussions held during our March 25th meeting. So I'll turn things over to you at this point if you'd like to proceed.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here again. We will try and give updates as quickly as possible and save time for discussion among the commission and some of the items that call for discussion. Following the order of the agenda, Greg and I will give an update on the data received thus far. To refresh everybody's memories, last meeting we discussed the peer cities most comparable to the city of Columbus had a larger group. We winnowed that list down to a total of 30 cities, including the city of Columbus, so 29 peer cities. Mr. Beaverson had sent out a salary survey ahead of that, and we've gotten responses. And Greg, I'll turn it over to you to go over the first set of spreadsheets.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
I'll refer you to your 8.5 by 14 salary survey responses thus far. My apologies in advance for how small some of these are, but it's a lot of data and it's hard to fit it on one page, especially there, the very last one. I know it's very small. But we just wanted to print this out and give you a thus far view of the responses we've received. Out of the 29 cities, again, it's 30 altogether, but not including Columbus, we have 13 responses for a 43% response rate. We also have some, some of the typical questions that people ask for follow-up and things like that. So I've gotten a few phone calls from some cities and some email messages, and so we can more or less count on them to send us their data. So this is updated daily as I get the information, but we wanted to make sure you were aware that we were indeed receiving data. I did want to note too, you'll see some of the larger cities that you removed from the list the last time on here. Since we sent out the message to the larger group, we're still retaining that data as they send it in, and then what I do is I try to hide it in this document, and then at the point when we're done, I'll unhide it and send that data back out to those cities to make sure that we thank them for participating nonetheless. And that's all I have, unless you have any questions for me.
So, oh, sorry.
That you were asking for responses by?
It was this Friday, April 10th. And we have sent out one reminder. I sent that out last Friday. And depending on how many responses we get, up until this Friday, I could send out another email. It's usually more personal, a little better to actually pick up the phone and make a call. And I've done that many times, and certainly I'm willing to do that. Whatever gets us the most data back.
I'm sorry, Greg, once again, the deadline date?
This Friday, April 10th. Yes, sir.
And so, turning your attention to a second set of spreadsheets. You have 4 pieces of paper, slightly more colorful, which, can you get a copy, Greg? What this is more for visual purposes and to get your feedback on where we're heading in terms of presenting the final information once it's all compiled. Essentially, what these sheets represent is an attempt to get on one piece of paper for each office the commission is considering the general information and background on that city. So the left-hand side of each of those pages will be identical for each office. And then the office-specific information for the mayor, council, including the council president, the city attorney, and the auditor. The attempt here will be to present to you information in as clear and concise fashion as possible, where the information we get back from many of these cities is not necessarily simple and concise or uniform, but for the purposes of sorting, arranging, ranking, arranging information in a way that will help you make a decision, created a separate spreadsheet with the intent of having one piece of paper per office that we can then source by various criteria. And we'll get to some of those criteria and what might or may not be important to consider later on in this conversation. But this is the visual. Columbus is highlighted yellow. The goal would be that if we do simple sorts in Excel, once we get all the data in, we'll be able to follow where Columbus ranks on a variety of different categories, and hopefully present this information to you in a way that's as useful as possible. That said, Greg's sheets are very important and may prove insightful because they're the data as reported in its raw form from the cities themselves. There may be an instance where you will want more information on a particular area, and we'll be able to refer back to Greg's sheets for the official record. In addition, what we contemplate with these sheets, we have our LRO staff, including Tom Diamond, who have been working this week not only to compile the information that Greg has received and sort of have a redundant record of everything that he's serving as the collection point for, but also going out and finding open source information and filling in gaps where possible. And then additionally, where you see blue ink would indicate a live link if this were an electronic document, with the goal of, if we get to a point where we haven't received a response, but we were able to find some open source information in electronic form, you could click on that and follow the source of it. You'd put a caveat and a disclaimer on it that would not necessarily be wholly and entirely accurate, but it would be better than not having anything at all, and you would be able to see the source of that information. And our Legislative Research Office is going to the best, most direct source for that information. We will see where we end up at the end of this week with responses directly back from cities and continue to work on populating these sheets with open source information. But the ultimate goal is to be able to get to you, in advance of our next meeting, the most complete set of data possible. I'm encouraged by the level of response to this point from cities, including those that will ultimately be part of the final 30 we've considered, but it's been a positive response, right? The only other caveat I'd put forward is that the sort of duplicative effort that we're doing here, I think, will result in the best data and may end up resulting in some additional analysis and information that we might not have received if we weren't looking at sort of the self-reporting closely. Just one example, and it's the only one I could provide for you at this moment as we're still getting into the data, but the city of Austin reported back and did so pretty quickly and completely. But there's an interesting dynamic going on in the city of Austin right now. Many changes just since the beginning of this year, including moving from an all at-large system of council to an all district-based system, increasing the number of council members, a brand new mayor who's not a strong mayor, and a conversation about increasing the number of staff on their council and in the mayor's office. Very fluid discussions that are happening. And one additional development was the mayor forgoed his salary this year. So the report back from Austin showed the dollar amount for the mayor's salary as zero, where in fact that's not really helpful to this discussion because it's not actually zero. He's just taking a zero pay.
So we have access to what?
So we do have that as reported in one of the publications of record. That's what the clerk would refer to it in our research to help explain what the salary amount would be if the mayor chose to accept it. But the mayor is not accepting a salary this term. My guess is that we get more and more data back and do research. There will be other instances where there's more to the story than just the data, but we'll do our best to sort through that and give you the best apples to apples, oranges to oranges comparison possible. But it is interesting that just in the time that we've started our work here, there have been some significant changes in Austin. It's the nature of changes in local government, I guess. I think that that pretty much wraps up bullet point number A under updates. Are there any questions?
Yes, just a couple. One,
Sure.
We previously discussed, I believe it was our last meeting, the likelihood of obtaining or your intent to obtain information from entities like the Ohio Municipal League and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, maybe even the National League of Cities. Any luck with that at this point?
So the Ohio Municipal League did share with us, and so we will have, for certain, by the end of this exercise, all the information on Ohio cities. From 2013 would be the asterisk there. We're attempting to get, and we may get through Greg's salary survey, more up-to-date information. But at a minimum, if we don't receive responses from all of our partners in Ohio, we'd have 2013 numbers from the Ohio Municipal League. I may defer and call Tom up to the witness stand, so to speak, here at the end, but we did follow up with both the U.S. Conference of Mayors and National League of Cities. If memory serves me, and I'll refer back, National League of Cities did not have any information on record relative to salaries. So perhaps that's a request we'll make of them to undertake that research in the future, maybe ahead of the next Citizens Commission on Elected Official Compensation. And U.S. Conference of Mayors said we received a response. You know, we've had multiple points of contact there and follow-up. We've not yet received a response.
Yeah, just wanted to follow up with that since it had been discussed previously. And just one other question. At this stage, the intent is still for us to just maintain the information, but we won't have any detailed discussion until we've obtained additional information, if not, well, until we've obtained additional information from the other cities that have not yet responded. And at that point, you'll summarize and have something for us to review as a commission.
Yes, sir, that's my understanding. And then at that point, we can analyze the data kind of in the normal ways that we would, and then take your requests to analyze it in different ways as needed.
This at least gives us some sense of where a number of the cities are.
Yes.
And a flavor for what it is we're likely to receive going forward.
Yes, sir.
Very helpful, thank you. Any other questions from any of the commissioners? Great, thank you.
I guess Additionally, too, when we get a little further along in some additional data, and we can certainly provide this to the commissioners in electronic form, depending on how hands-on you are with Excel and how much time you want to put into this in your off hours, certainly you could have fun with sorting spreadsheets yourselves and start doing some of this analysis on your own, or not. But we can provide it to you if you'd like. Yeah.
We trust your ability. Okay, very good.
Very good. Do you want to go on to the next bullet point? All right, item B. So one of the topics we discussed last meeting was potential topics for future meeting, and the idea of receiving a presentation on the consumer price index. And to refresh the memories of the commission and viewers at home, not only will the commission be charged with setting base salary for the elected offices, auditor, city attorney, council, and mayor, but also then setting a maximum annual cost of living increase pegged to the consumer price index. So the question was, what is the consumer price index? And more specifically, the charter states the average increase in the consumer price index of the previous 4 years. I'll make 2 points. One, while City Attorney Cox is not with us today, he will be prepared at a future meeting to provide an opinion on what that means. The question is it the preceding 4 years increase, the average increase the preceding 4 years of the consumer price index preceding 4 years to this moment in time? Or is it an average increase of the consumer price index of the preceding 4 years of right up until the year in which you were setting that salary? So for instance, is it 2014 in the 4 years before the average? Or if we end up setting a base rate for an office holder beginning in 2018, let's say, is the increase in 2019 the average of 18, 17, 16, and 15? The difference would be is we don't know what that number is looking into the future. The flip side of that is that if we were looking to get the best and most accurate figure that would be up to date, you may want to do it based on a formula that you would suggest and that the auditor might follow in future years and when setting that pay rate. We're attempting to determine legally what makes most sense and what we actually have the ability to do. I'm not sure I've adequately explained that, but we'll follow back up on that with the city attorney's opinion at a future meeting. The question is, while in theory we could develop a formula that we could plug in the average increase in consumer price index of the preceding 4 years when we get to that future moment in time, we're not sure that the state constitution and the charter allows us to use a formula and may require that we have a specific dollar amount set by ordinance of council. And that's what we're really trying to get at. So we will have a definitive opinion from the city attorney on that point. Regardless of his opinion, it would still be good to understand what the consumer price index is and how that's decided. I won't steal the thunder of the eventual presentation, but I'll explain to you what that presentation will be and who will be giving it and how we arrived at that point. And we unfortunately won't have it today. But after the last meeting, staff had some internal conversations about what would make most sense, who should we be speaking to find that industry expert, that third-party unbiased opinion and description of what the CPI is. One of our first phone calls was to City Auditor Hugh Dorian, who's been providing financial guidance for the city for a very, very long time. He had contemplated this thought, partly because he was among the members of the Charter Review Commission that put forward this recommendation and is a forward-looking man who knew that this question would eventually arise. His suggestion was to seek outside counsel and enter into contract with Bill Lafayette, who many of you are familiar with, from his own firm, Regionomics. He quite often gives presentations to various groups some of which of you represent. I believe Morpsey and the Chamber certainly has done work with Regionomics and Mr. Lafayette in the past. He is viewed as a credible source locally and regionally and certainly nationally on these issues, and in fact uses the CPI as a basis for analysis of various different economic indicators. We reached out to Mr. Lafayette. He has agreed, and the city will be entering into contract with Regionomics to provide that report. Unfortunately, on relatively short notice, he was not available this week and needed some time to be able to put together information that would be what you're looking for. But if this commission would continue to follow the cadence of sort of bi-weekly meetings, he is prepared and has blocked some time to present the week of the 20th. We'll get to that when we discuss timeline, and certainly that could change, and he's expressed a willingness to try and be as flexible as possible. But he'll be looking at presenting what the CPI is. There are multiple types of CPI that the commission may wish to consider, including a regional CPI for the Midwest, which may or may not be valuable to consider. And then also talk about some differences in how different types of CPI, for instance, there's a core CPI which excludes energy and food costs, and that gets to the volatility of those costs and factoring the CPI. Again, I won't go much further than that because we've got a expert on hand who'll be prepared to present, but I did want to give that background in the work that happened between our last meeting and today, an additional explanation of why we're not having that presentation today, but what we can look forward to at our next meeting. Any questions or thoughts?
Block the entire week, or are there specific days of the day?
I asked him to block the Wednesday and Thursday of that week following what we've done to this point. The Wednesday afternoon hours may be problematic for him in another job he has, but we didn't go much further than that because I didn't want to get out in front of the commission and presuppose when you all might be available that week.
Any questions?
Just a
Please.
brief one. Thank you for the great information. When Dr. Lafayette does come and present, it'd be helpful to know with all the various types of CPI, which ones are typically used for HR purposes. I know that there's myriad of them as you've discovered, so that'd be
I should ask the question and get feedback from you, but this is where Mr. Lafayette was heading. His goal was to outline the base definition of what the CPI is generally referred to in the public domain, break it down further from there, and then ultimately provide some options that the commission may consider, and then ultimately a recommendation of what he might use to make the basis of a recommendation. Of course, that is simply a recommendation from an outside source, and you could decide otherwise, but in order to be able to provide as much helpful guidance as possible. But to that point, we'll ask the specific question in this context, which would be most appropriate. So we can know that.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Can move on to item C.
Yes. So another suggestion from last meeting was to get a presentation from someone who's done this before, another city or another commission who's gone through this exercise. As this is our first time, and as we're working our way through it, learning, perhaps there were other lessons to be learned from other commissions. We worked very hard to try and find one of our counterparts from another Ohio city. Unfortunately, have not found a taker on our invitation just yet. We have not given up and are hopeful that maybe through a variety of relationships might be able to cajole our friends in Dayton a short hour's drive away from attending, but we're not successful as of yet. We have been developed a very positive relationship with a staff person who staffed the Phoenix Commission However, travel from Phoenix to Columbus for this purpose and what would be a relatively short presentation was not practical or in the budget, so to speak, just yet. Though maybe we could find it in our budget somewhere. That being said, we explored the idea of possibly using technology that the city has in place to video conference someone in. Unfortunately, technology that's in place that could potentially provide for that experience is not working presently. The third option was a simple teleconference, and we are relatively confident that we could get a staff person from the city of Phoenix who's been through multiple iterations of their compensation commission to be on the phone. That wasn't scheduled and isn't on the books for this meeting. But if you believe that a phone interview with commissioners, and we've all participated in many teleconferences before in various capacities, would be of benefit to the group, we can certainly set that up for the next meeting. So I'll defer to the group for instruction on that, whether you'd like us to follow up on that item.
Thoughts from commissioners?
I think it might be helpful. I prefer to Skype them in if we could get the technology working. I think that might be more useful in the event that they had handouts or PowerPoint, but in the event that we can't, even if we only spend 15 minutes with lessons learned, I think under the time frame that we're working under, it might be helpful.
Great. We will pursue that then, if that's the pleasure of the group.
I certainly have no issue with it. I think it makes great sense. Is that a consensus? Okay, very good. Let's try to get it set up.
Great.
Is there any benefit in trying the technology one more time to see?
There's some systems-wide issues that we're dealing with some vendors
They
that
don't-
have not necessarily delivered on promises made. And the challenge is, from staff, we don't want to put the commission in a presentation or overpromise and underdeliver. I think we've all been in a position where maybe a PowerPoint hasn't worked quite as planned, and you look a little embarrassed. We didn't want to promise someone live via satellite on these screens that we have here and have it not work. We haven't given up on it,
Right.
and there's a potential that in the coming couple of weeks we might be able to get that to work, but I don't want to, again, overpromise and underdeliver.
Keep us posted.
Sure. Next on the list was website updates. The commission gave two specific, very nominal changes to the website from our last commission. That is something that we did deliver on. On the contact page of the website, it was requested that we provide a phone number that folks could call. If rather than sending an email, they just simply wanted to pick up the phone and register their opinions, that they had a number to do so. That's now posted on the website. In addition, if someone wanted to write an old-fashioned letter, there's a mailing address, care of the city clerk, that's posted on that contact page. So if you click contact on the website, there'll be a web form that folks can put their email address and their general concern and hit submit. It'll go to us. There's an email address if they'd like to send a similar message and include an attachment, any information or research that they may have provided that they would like you to consider, a phone number, and a snail mail U.S. Postal Service address where they can get that information. In addition, on the subject of the web form, and provide assurance that it is up and working and has been utilized to this point, I can provide copies if you'd like to pass it along. We've received, I'll give you a summary now, but we've received two web form public input messages. The latest, which has not yet been responded to, but will be within 24 hours, and we still have a few hours to get that response. It came in at 8:18, I believe, last night. But the first was received last week and received a response within 24 hours. It's a question relative to the timing of these meetings and whether or not there would be public meetings outside of the normal work hours. That was a discussion that this commission contemplated from the very beginning and was discussed. Response was provided to show all the different means in which that constituent could see these meetings, the proceedings, live, the video, the minutes, all the data that you've received online. which presumably this person would have access to because that's how they sent the message to us. But then also that it had been discussed that there would be a public meeting, at least one, at some point in this process when it made most sense, where outside of the normal business hours, where constituents could come down and speak before the commission and weigh in. In that addition, there would be a separate public process in the sense that council must act on whatever recommendations come out of this process, that there would be public meetings associated with that also. I've not received any follow-up on that response. The second meeting, or the second comment that was submitted last evening was the makeup of the commission and how these members were selected and the different sort of interests that you represent and expertise that each of the members brings to the fore. The question was, is there a lay member or a citizen member of the commission? So the response there will to point out and highlight the different strengths and assets and background that each of you provide. And Commissioner Easterday, I'll be pointing out a fact that we talked about at the first meeting, which is that your role in the Harrison West Civic Association, your role there, sort of dual role. But it'll also be pointed out that by nature of the commission, as provided for in the charter, each of you are citizens of Columbus and must live in the city and pay Columbus taxes. So in that sense, you are all resident voters and residents of the city of Columbus, and pointing out the various different assets you all bring to bear. If there are other points you'd like to stress, I'd be happy to do so. But those are the two public web comments that we've gotten to this point. And I have copies of those that I'll provide before the end of the meeting.
Very good. Appreciate that update. Any questions from that update? Okay. Standing, let's proceed on to item 4.
All right, item 4, discussion of key questions or context for recommendations. So I did have an exchange with Director Christie over the past week, and while I'm yapping, I'm going to pass around a small stack, one piece of paper that's relatively well-written questions, but sort of stream of consciousness, not well-refined and meant to spark conversation and dialogue among the commission. But knowing where we're at this moment in time, and that data is still coming, and we're about halfway there roughly, plus or minus a few responses that were received today on the data. Once we receive that data, once we sort it in the ways that we've sort of visually represented to you that we think that we'll be able to sort this data, once we have that information, what are the questions that commissioners might want to start asking amongst yourselves, even ahead of receiving some of that data, just to put us in sort of the right mindset of what ultimately are we trying to get to with the recommendations. The recommendations will be in the context of a larger report, which will have that data and sort of the background of how we arrived at those recommendations. But really, ultimately, what are the points of fact and finite recommendations that we're going to put forward once we reach the end and culmination of the process. So put together on one piece of paper what I believe is a series of questions that would be applicable to all 4 office holders, but slightly different for each of the office holders. And I thought I might walk through those and try and explain the thought behind there, and then hopefully get feedback, and then additional questions that we might add to this list. And I think what that will inform is how we ultimately present the data to you a couple weeks from now, once we have that, and sort of frame the presentation of that data once we get to that point. But just working for the list for the benefit of those at home and around the table who have it in front of them, looking at when considering all the salaries for survey responses that we get, the independent research that we're conducting, Are there peer cities among the 29 compared which are more closely aligned with Columbus than others? I think that when you look at the data that's come into this point, it'll start to see that, okay, well, on a certain level, these are certainly very comparable cities, whether that be the size of population, the MSA, the size of their budget, or maybe just the feel of the city, having traveled there and having a familiarity with it. But when better understanding their form of government, whether their auditor is called an auditor or it's a comptroller, whether that auditor is elected or appointed, whether it's a strong mayor system or a weak mayor system, whether there's a city manager or not, that there are going to be considerations that might help us arrange information that align Columbus with cities that at first blush might not have been the most comparable city. Likewise, there might be characteristics of the peer cities, either in size, structure, budget, or practice, that make some of those cities more or less comparable, or vice versa, that make them very non-comparable or not comparable at all. Those will have to be decisions that the commission makes, but for instance, if looking at the city of Austin and looking at the office of the mayor, that may or may not be a comparable city that you want to compare, because it is not a strong mayor system. It's a system that has a city manager, and in the case of the current mayor, as I alluded to before, that mayor has foregoed their salary, which is less than the city of mayor. Conversely, the city manager in the city of Austin makes just shy of $300,000 annually. So perhaps it's a situation where if we do compare ourselves to Austin, you consider the mayor and city manager's role in combination. But there isn't necessarily a right or wrong way, but I pose the questions just to sort of start to get the creative juices flowing and thinking of how we might arrange this information when it's presented. Moving on down the list, when examining those cities most comparable to Columbus, how does the total compensation for each elected office compare to the current compensation offered for the same office in Columbus? That seems like a no-brainer on one hand. However, going back to our first meeting and the colorful spreadsheet presented, there are compensation levels set for certain Columbus office holders that are into the future. So the question might be, looking at the current compensation today as it compares to other cities, which would then get you to the question of those out years here in Columbus. Is that good, bad, or indifferent? Is the current compensation higher or lower? How does it rank across all those cities to help you make a judgment of those out year salaries and whether or not they need to be adjusted? When asking all those questions that I've already posed, are there a smaller subset of cities that we ultimately look at? We broached that question from a different angle at the beginning of our conversation of who are our peer cities. Mr. Beaverson set out a set of core peer cities that, for the purposes of HR and salary comparisons in our normal course of work, and unelected employees of the city are good core peer cities, but perhaps there's a different set of core peer cities that we arrive at. If we then move on and we start to organize that data, are we getting to a point where we have a good set of comparable cities and comparable positions and salaries, and are we able to rate those and start to make some judgment of where Columbus falls for each of those positions to determine whether or not any adjustment is warranted? And that's where we start to work towards what is the ultimate recommendation of an amount would be. And it's further down the list of these questions posed, it starts to get more down to the detail of if an adjustment was warranted, the timing of that adjustment, whether it would be in the soonest possible year allowed by the charter, and what are the potential consequences of that, good and bad. For instance, perhaps the evidence comes back to support an adjustment upward for a particular office holder. And there's a substantial difference in that we're below the average and the commission feels like an adjustment is warranted. There may be a desire to make that adjustment as soon as possible, but in doing so, that would, as we stated at our first meeting, require in some instances undoing rates that are already set. And whether or not that's something that the commission wants to recommend or weigh in on. If not, what implications does that then have in looking towards the future, that first year when a rate isn't set? And understanding that increases past that new base rate are going to be tied to the CPI, what impact will that have on that base rate that is recommended for future years? These are all what-if questions, and I don't want to color the judgment in advance, but I'm trying to lay the groundwork for the types of questions that once we get the data, we'll have to contemplate. And then I think sort of the final question there on the list is that once we work through those questions and potentially and likely others, and come to those ultimate recommendations for each of the 4 office holders, is the commission comfortable that this is the absolute maximum or the ceiling for all of the different office holders, simply indicating and reminding to all the stakeholders, the elected office holders, council who eventually have to implement this via ordinance, but taxpayers, that this would be the ceiling for any recommendation, and that less could be put in place, but that there would be flexibility under that ceiling. And just making sure that the commission is ultimately comfortable with the final recommendation as sort of being the ceiling of what could actually be implemented by ordinance. So ultimately, getting to that point where for each of the office holders, looking at a base salary, knowing what that is, having the benefit of the presentation on the CPI and knowing roughly what that number will be as a percentage increase as a cost of living in out years, and being comfortable with if that is the maximum rate for that office holder, is that good? Are we comfortable with it? And are we good as putting that forward as a final recommendation? So that's a lot to consider, and my hope is that perhaps over the coming weeks you continue to think about it in your free moments and in between the various pieces of information and data that we'll share with you over that time. You continue to think about it, but hopefully, potentially, have some conversation here today of other questions that maybe you've already contemplated that aren't captured here, that will help us organize and better analyze the data as it comes in and present it to you in a way that's helpful to you in getting to those final recommendations. So I'll turn the floor back over to the chair.
Okay, thank you for that. You're absolutely correct. That's a lot of information to absorb. At first glance, let me ask the other commissioners whether there are other questions that, well, before asking that, let me ask whether there's anything you've heard thus far or seen that you feel very strongly or otherwise that should not be included among the things we would take into consideration? Or does everything here appear to be reasonable and appropriate for the task at hand? In light of that, then, are there other questions that come to mind that may not have been included here? Give us a couple of minutes at least to look them over again.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any to add at this time. I think once we have all of the data and start kind of sifting through it, other questions may naturally rise to the surface. I think this list is a great start. Don't have anything to add at this time.
Very good. Other members? Outstanding. One thought, and Ken, you may have already said this, that when we do determine the entity that we'll have the opportunity to to work with in determining steps that they took and identifying some of the best practices that they may have employed in reaching their recommendations. It would be interesting to ask whether they had a similar list of considerations and what may have been included in their list as well. And I don't know to what extent the commission members may be uncomfortable with, at some point, sharing the list of questions that we are, at least at this point, taking into consideration with whomever the other entity might be, whether it's Phoenix or ultimately Dayton. Any concern about doing that? Okay. So that's one thing that
That's an excellent suggestion.
yeah, they may take a look at this list and say, hey, there are a few things that we also took into consideration, and you may want to give thought to A, B, or C. Very good. Thank you for the time and effort in putting this together, all who were involved in doing so. It's a very comprehensive list, and I think provides a great roadmap for us. Okay, very good. In addition to discussing the scheduling of our next meeting, I definitely want to make sure that we're all comfortable with and have our arms around the timelines that are established by the charter, and having some context for the April 24th quote-unquote deadline. Obviously, today is April the 8th, and we have a deadline for receipt of data from approximately 16 other jurisdictions. And the likelihood of all of that coming in by Friday is probably not the greatest. So how realistic is it that we will have gone through a comprehensive review? The likelihood of getting Dr. Lafayette here will probably not be until sometime the 20th. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about just how hard and fast the April 24th date, or the concept of a recommendation being submitted within 3 months of the appointment of the commission. And that will help us, I think, to determine when the next meeting should be scheduled, or how frequently, how many more meetings may be needed, et cetera.
I know that Rory and I have discussed it and are prepared to share our thoughts for your discussion and consideration. I think our goal is to, as staff, to continue to press as hard and as fast to get the information in as quickly as possible, to compile it, to be arranging it and organizing it in a fashion that allows you to make as good as decisions as possible in as short amount of time as possible. That said, there is not any finite consequence or deadline associated with the delivery of the report, other than that council may compel the commission to deliver a report after 3 months. 3 months certainly was given as a deadline for a purpose and for a reason, and certainly shows the intent of the Charter Review Commission, and certainly the will of voters. So certainly we wouldn't want to go any further past that deadline than absolutely necessary. On the other hand, obviously the intent of the process, the formation of this group, the importance of your work, this being the first time it was gathered and not having a body of work to build from, I think the voters would likely say, if given the opportunity to weigh in, you'd rather do it the right way than do it quickly. Getting it right and getting it done well and correctly, that would inspire confidence, would probably be more important priorities than getting it done on the exact date, 3 months out from the formation of this commission. That may or may not be presumptuous, and certainly is my opinion and not yours, and I don't want to speak for the commission, but I think our goal would be to continue to press forward, to try and follow as aggressive a timeline as possible, but to contemplate that there are certain things that just may simply not be possible and would be a detriment to the final product, to push forward ahead of having certain information.
It seems to me that we will be in a much better position at our next meeting to determine exactly what we have in hand, what period of time it will take to analyze that information, and for us to go through our own analysis and review. And I think we'll be in a better position than we are today to attempt to establish yet another deadline and then hopefully work as efficiently and effectively as possible within the context of the deadline. Any other thoughts by the commission members based on what Ken just shared with us about timeframes, et cetera? I think what you proposed is very reasonable. It makes sense, and I agree with you that I think voters will, given the circumstances, afford us some latitude in terms of the timeframe. So, yes,
Chair,
sir.
if I might just add it, I would just say also that although it may get pushed out some, I don't think it's going to end up being, that much further out. But there's just certain things that are going to, I think that we need to, that the commission needs to hear and data that they need to get before we can make a really good decision on things. So
I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I would like an opinion from the city attorney regarding the timeframes and as to whether city council needs to take any action to extend our work. I don't want to make any assumptions around that, so could you have the city attorney offer us an opinion on that?
Happy to.
Thank you.
If it, for the purposes of this meeting and discussion, if it gives you any amount of comfort, initial conversations have been had with the city attorney on this, so I don't think that'll be difficult to have him weigh in on that.
It's an excellent suggestion. Okay, with that in mind, it appears that Dr. Lafayette has set aside some time the week of the 20th. Can we take a look at our respective calendars and see whether or not any dates during that week would work? I know that the best days that week for me are going to be on that Wednesday or Thursday.
I'm out of the state Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm out of state on Thursday and Friday.
I said it first. No,
I figured. Absolutely.
So we're chasing each other.
Absolutely.
Where are you going? Maybe we could go together.
How about Arizona?
It's a road
We can all take that trip.
That's right.
Do a direct interview with those folks. Okay.
Cheryl Austin on staff was in the city of Mesa just recently. I tried to convince her to make a stop by City Hall. Mesa, Arizona also had a Citizens Commission on elected official compensation. Yeah.
Tourism and Visitors Bureau.
Strangely, Cup spring training took precedent.
Realistically, then, we're looking at the following week. So let's go there.
that's the week of the 27th.
Yeah.
Yes.
In light of the time constraints, would anyone consider meeting the end of next week? Do you think that might give Mr. Lafayette enough time? Or what does anybody think about that?
Unfortunately, I'm out the entire week. I leave on the 13th, won't be back until the 21st. So next week is not possible for me, unfortunately.
Oh, no problem.
For the record, Kristen and I are available.
That'll be stricken from the record. But thank you for that nonetheless.
Right, what does that say about that? Right.
Perhaps the week of the 27th?
Let's see.
The afternoon of the 27th looks good for me.
Yes, right.
The 27th in the afternoon, I'm open.
I can make it work.
I'm sorry, guys. Can you look at either the 28th through the 1st? So I'm
Sure.
just getting back on the 27th from another.
Retired life is good.
Oh, yes, it is. Trust me, you're a lot busier than you were when you worked.
The afternoon of the 30th works well.
We look at 28th and 1st, I thought.
The
Let's just say
28th through the 1st.
Oh, through the 1st, I'm sorry. Did you not have the 28th?
The 28th, I could do 4 o'clock. That's fine.
I make a motion we consider another time, another start time, an earlier time, but I could do
Sure.
4. I could do 4
Or
if
the
we want
morning.
to stick with that. I can't.
Did someone say the afternoon of the 30th?
Yes, I did.
That's doable for me.
I'm available.
I'm open.
Does that work for you? Why don't we look at the afternoon of April 30th?
We'll get to work on that.
4 p.m.
If that time works for everyone, for us, okay?
It's for me, great.
At what time?
4?
Maybe a coffee. Correct, a coffee.
Maybe I can make a suggestion that,
Sure.
Because there is quite some time between now and then, that if there are documents that can be gotten to us ahead of time, that we can do our due diligence so that we can come really prepared
Absolutely.
to that
That
meeting.
was, thanks for raising that issue. I was going to suggest that, well, I think it's clearly the desire that you'd like to get together sooner than that. Schedules don't allow for it. On the plus side, I do think it will give some additional time to further refine the data that comes in and to make sure that it's presented in every which way, sliced and diced, and give you the best opportunity for a really productive meeting when we do meet on the 30th.
Along the same lines, to the extent that there are nuances, and the city of Austin is one of those, I think, very good examples. Maybe there can be footnotes to identify those specific things, and so we can look at all the data in a specific context.
We couldn't do it without footnotes.
Well, there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever.
Yes,
to be with something
that's
with
right.
Sounds great. Are there other specific next steps that we've not yet addressed?
I should maybe repeat back just some of the deliverables that we've discussed
Okay,
about.
sure.
In addition to scheduling the presentation with Dr. Lafayette and Regionomics on the CPI, there's a specific request to make certain that any recommendation or presentation speak to what the most appropriate CPI for this purposes might be, as suggested by Commissioner Murdoch. City Attorney will be prepared to provide either in writing or verbally or both, preferably, a clarification on the timing and timeline of a report. In addition, get him to provide an explanation relative to the CPI and that question of timing, the average 4 years increase in the CPI, what that means, to help inform your decisions. Any additional data that we put together and able to piece together in advance of the next meeting. And also to be working to schedule, perhaps with the representative from the city of Phoenix, a phone interview, and also share with him some of the questions we're contemplating to determine if there are additional considerations that they contemplated. And we may expand that to other commissions if it makes sense in the course of trying to get a presentation from an outside commissioner. Am I missing anything there?
The only thing that we haven't discussed in great detail, and I don't know that we need to at this juncture, but just when the timing of our public meetings.
Yes.
We're going to have to fit that in the
Yes.
schedule at some point. For public hearings.
One potential thing that's contemplated previously was doing a dual meeting. So for instance, if you met at 4 o'clock on the 30th, perhaps at the conclusion of that meeting, sort of the working meeting, adjourn or recess and move next door to Chambers and have a public hearing. That would be one option. I do not know what your availability that evening would be or whether that would be workable. Certainly, it would seem that this next meeting that we're having, we will have the data and information that all of you have wanted and felt necessary to have on hand and to be shared with the public that would inform any input from the public. In other words, they would have something to react to. Another option would be, rather than waiting 2 weeks, but more immediately the following week, have a public hearing and just a public hearing and have the information that was shared on the 30th available online ahead of that public hearing, and the ability to promote that and link to it and give people the greatest opportunity to view that information ahead of any public hearing. I'm sort of speaking out loud here to allow you to have the discussion, what would make
I like
most
the
sense.
concept of, having a separate public hearing the week following our April 30th meeting, simply because it gives us that much more time in that meeting to absorb the information, have that dialogue, et cetera. I don't object to attempting to schedule a public hearing on the same date. I just think it would be potentially challenging to do so. I'm not sure that that would fit into everyone's schedules, and it would make for a fairly lengthy evening. So that's my thought, commissioners.
I agree.
I would agree. I'm envisioning our next meeting could be a lengthy one, with interview and presentations and such.
Absolutely. So, what are you good with that? Okay.
Since we raised it and we're all here in person and got our calendars out once, do we want to go through the exercise of getting them out again?
Absolutely.
This is the week of the 4th.
Looking at an evening time, like 5 or 5:30.
Yeah, generally just for the benefit of the group, when we have public hearings in council, generally we encourage council members to try and schedule them either 5 or 5:30. 5:30 being slightly more preferable just for those who work up until 5, gives you a half hour to get from your place of employment to City Hall and get here in time. And I know that the Charter Review Commission kept the rolls open, so to speak, and allowed for speaker slips to be accepted up until 6 p.m. when they started their hearings at 5:30. The only other caveats I would add that week that the 4th chambers won't be available because council will actually be meeting, and the 5th might not be advisable because that's actually election day. The polls will be open up until 7 p.m. that night. So we might want to consider the 6th or the 7th as lead options in the evening, with Friday night not being a great night for public.
6th or the 7th would by my calendar.
6th and 7th in the evening are not best for me. The 8th would work. Or I would ask that we consider doing the daytime public hearing that week, because those evenings are not right. I could make some arrangements if I must, but if we have some area to be flexible, I would ask for that consideration. So could we contemplate a daytime? We did that with the charter. We did a public hearing, one in the day, like around lunch, and we did one in the evening.
I have no objection there. It's just a matter of determining what day works best.
You said 4 and 5 are probably out. That makes sense to
Yeah.
me. So we're looking at the 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Right. The 7th is wide open for me, so we can do day or evening.
Let's see.
What time are day public hearings typically held?
I'd have to check to see what time the Charter Review Commission met. I think there's a certain amount of flexibility there. Essentially, the rationale behind having a daytime meeting would be to pick up folks who either aren't working outside of the home or have, non-traditional work hours or work hours out of the regular 8 to 5, 9 to 5 day. Second and third shift folks. Certainly mid-morning or even over the lunch hour or early afternoon would be plausible. I'm not sure that there's one set time during the day that would be better for the majority of residents over another.
Do we think that 2 public hearings are needed versus 1?
Recalling what I think I heard the commission say from one of our first meetings, the first or second meeting, I think the thought was that if there was a daytime hearing had, that we would then be pursuing 2 public hearings to assure that there was at least 1 evening public hearing. So if that wisdom is still, if that's where the direction we still want to go, I think we would have a second public hearing then. That might provide the option of having a daytime hearing, obviously the open forums through the web, through email, through mail and phone, My guess is that we get closer to considering data and coming closer to recommendations, there'll be greater attention paid to this from the outside media. It may generate additional input from citizens. That first daytime meeting may serve as a platform for folks to provide input ahead of any potential recommendations. There may be an opportunity here based on the timing that the commission may come up with some draft recommendations following that hearing, which then would give residents something additional to react to, and the potential for an evening hearing following discussion of some draft recommendations. Again, thinking out loud, and that's awfully dangerous. But just for the benefit of the group, if we were contemplating having a second public hearing and one in the evening, that might be one benefit or additional benefit of having that hearing later in the process.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, perhaps we contemplate a mid-morning that week then, an aim for people who
Sure.
are able to make that work.
Mid-morning as in somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 o'clock?
10, 11,
10,
yeah.
10:30, whatever.
What week are we looking at?
The week of
Week
the
of the
4th, well, essentially the 6th, 7th, and 8th, but the 4th and 5th appear to be completely out. Well, if we're looking at a daytime meeting, then the 4th is back in the mix, because the council more than likely is not utilizing chambers during the day. Is that correct?
That's true.
So the 4th, 6th, 7th, preferably.
I prefer the 6th or 7th.
I'm good at either one.
Either day.
Is,
Logistically, the later in the week would be would be preferable over the 4th if the 7th is available for everybody.
I'm available on the 7th. After 11:30, so I can do a lunchtime hearing. See if that works for people.
so
So 11:30 to
I have a call that ends at 11:30. I can't get here before noon.
Oh. Okay. I can't do that afternoon.
You can't do noon?
I can't do after 12 on this.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Maybe we should take this offline. We spend a lot of
we're the
time doing
problem down here,
this. Maybe we should, I mean, we're here, but gosh, this is.
What about the 6th in the morning or
6th I can do.
likewise.
afternoon? Or
Morning.
I have a luncheon at 11:30, so I could do before then. But after that, I'll be tight for a
I have a
while.
hold for a presentation that morning, but it hasn't been confirmed yet, so I can check on it tomorrow. But that could work
Why don't we
otherwise.
tentatively look at, say 10 on the 6th? Sure. 10 to 11.
I have a luncheon at 11:30.
Okay, so 10 o'clock?
Maybe 10.
10 to 11.
Thank you.
So the 6th at 10?
Yes.
it's our working day.
We'll follow up offline to confirm that.
And just for the sake of planning as you go back, some additional details about how hearings previously worked. Certainly, the chair could suspend the rules, but the basis for the discussion, I believe, followed the rules of speaking before council, in which case the speaker slip was filled out in advance to outline basic information, but then to provide the gist, so to speak, of what was going to be delivered. And testimony was limited to 3 minutes per council rules, even if you extended that to 5 minutes or at the discretion of the chair, depending on the number of speakers, offered an extension of the time. The likelihood, if we keep roughly to that same time frame of going past an hour in terms of public speaking, is relatively unlikely at this point. You get a good number of speakers through in an hour's time, certainly in an hour and a half's time.
Yeah, I see no reason to suspend the standard rules. 3 minutes doesn't seem like a very long period of time, and it is when you're providing testimony.
And former Charter Review Commission members can attest to the fact that we also encouraged folks to submit written testimony above and beyond the verbal testimony. in lieu of being there at the hearing or in addition to testimony offered, so as to not limit people.
Any other matters to come before the commission before we adjourn? Before adjourning, let me again thank staff for outstanding work done thus far. The updates and the presentations today were extraordinarily helpful, and we just appreciate your competence and your diligence and look forward to additional information coming forward. If there's nothing further for our consideration, then third meeting is hereby adjourned.
Thank you.